Hello out there. Welcome to Wake Up to the Bible. This is going to be a new daily broadcast from us here at Flair Church. And I'm Daniel Kaplan, and I'm proud to be sitting here next to my father, the scholar, Dr. Mark Kaplan. I know he snickers, but he is actually a scholar, doctor of religion and social ethics from the University of Southern California. And you can go ahead too and give them a little more background besides that in terms of your biblical background.
I have a Master of Arts degree in Hebrew Studies from UT Austin, Hook 'em Horns. I have a bachelor's degree in theology from Ambassador College that later became Ambassador University. I have a Bachelor of Arts degree in history from Brooklyn College. I was trained uh, in Yeshiva University and in a very ultra-Orthodox yeshiva, Zichron Meir, which was located in Brooklyn and also in the Catskill Mountains, but later completely relocated to the Catskill Mountains. So it's still there. Zichron Meir is still functioning, and so I had a rather intense ultra-Orthodox training, but I went from there into being baptized into God's church. I do believe that I was baptized into God's church, and then later on ordained as a minister.
All right, and the way it's going to work here on this show is we are going to be reading through the law, and we are going to be following the traditional Jewish structure in terms of the different readings. They have readings that they have set up for the year, and so we're going to be able to follow them along in the calendar. So, if for some reason you knew somebody who goes to an Orthodox synagogue or something like that, you will be following along right with them. And that means we'll have about a chapter or something we'll be reading a day, and then we'll be discussing it. And so out throughout the course of this whole year, if you watch all of our broadcasts put together, well, you've gone through the entire law, which is what we are trying to do. And we will also have some bonus shows too, where we're going to go through the general epistles. So definitely subscribe, ring the bell, all those things, and then you'll catch all that material. But I don't want to waste any time. We might as well go ahead and get started. And it is funny when you start one of these shows, when you start with the beginning of the Bible, is because you end up starting with Genesis, which is probably one of the most complex books to discuss, especially the first few chapters with how the material works. So we have a little bit of a tall order, but I think we'll be able to do it. But we're going to go ahead and just read it for you, and then we will discuss what we have read. So let's go ahead and get started. And for this, I'm actually reading the translation that Robert Alter did because I figured you might like a little change of pace. So here we go. Chapter 1. When God began to create heaven and the earth then was welter and waste, and darkness over the deep, and God's breath hovering over the waters, God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. And God saw the light, that it was good, and divided the light from the darkness. And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And it was evening, and it was morning, first day. And God said, "Let there be a vault in the midst of the waters, and let it divide water from water." And God made the vault, and it divided the water beneath the vault from the water above the vault, and so it was. And God called the vault heavens. And it was evening, and it was morning, second day. And God said, "Let the waters under the heavens be gathered in one place, so that the dry land will appear." And so it was. And God called the dry land earth, and the gathering of waters he called seas. And God saw that it was good. And God said, "Let the earth grow grass, plants yielding seed of each kind, and trees bearing fruit of each kind that has its seed within it upon the earth." And so it was. And the earth put forth grass, plants yielding seed, and trees bearing fruit of each kind. And God saw that it was good. And it was evening, and it was morning, third day. And God said, "Let there be lights in the vault of the heavens to divide the day from the night, that they shall be signed for the fixed times and for days and years. And they shall be lights in the vault of the heavens to light up the earth." And so it was. And God made the two great lights, the great light for dominion of day, and the small light for dominion of night, and the stars. And God placed them in the vault of the heavens to light up the earth, and to have dominion over day and night, and to divide the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. And it was evening and it was morning, fourth day. And God said, let the waters swarm with the swarm of living creatures, and let fowl fly over the earth across the vault of the heavens. And God created the great sea monsters, and every living creature that crawls, which the water had swarmed forth of each kind, and the winged fowl of each kind. And God saw that it was good. And God blessed them, saying, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the water in the seas, and let the fowl multiply in the earth. And it was evening, and it was morning, fifth day. And God said, let the earth bring forth living creatures of each kind, cattle and crawling things, and wild beasts of each kind. And so it was. And God made wild beasts of each kind, and cattle of every kind, and all crawling things on the ground of each kind. And God saw that it was good. And God said, let us make a man in our image, by our likeness, to hold sway over the fish of the sea, and the fowl of the heavens, and the cattle, and the wild beasts, and all the crawling things that crawl upon the earth. And God created the human in his image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. And God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and conquer it, and hold sway over the fish of the sea, and the fowl of the heavens, and every beast that crawls upon the earth. And God said, look, I have given you every seed-bearing plant on the face of all the earth, and every tree that has fruit-bearing seed, yours they will be for food. And to all the beasts of the earth, and to all the fowl of the heavens, and to all that crawls on the earth, which has the breath of life within it, the green plants for food. And so it was. And God saw all that he had done, and look, it was very good. And it was evening, and it was morning, the sixth day. Then the heavens and the earth were completed, and all their array. And God completed on the seventh day the task he had done. And he ceased on the seventh day from all the task he had done. And God blessed the seventh day and hallowed it, for on it he had ceased from all his task that he had created to do. So this first reading is obviously a pretty classic one. It's a creation account of Genesis. Lots of material to cover though beyond just the basic idea of what's going on. Um, what are some of the things that you like come to mind, especially towards the beginning there? I mean, you have I like how he says welter and waste. He tries to get that rhyming kind of like the Hebrew, but from the chaos you have the source of order with God.
I have a high regard for Robert Alter's expertise in that field, and I haven't read his notes. I'm surprised, excuse me, why he hasn't called, translated literally one day rather than first day. The other days are you use the ordinal number, second, third, fourth, but the first day says one day. So I have to check his notes as to why he didn't literally translate
Hmm.
it. Now I have a former student who began studying biblical Hebrew with me years ago. Then he went on to become a great biblical scholar, and he's a doctor and a PhD in this field, and he works with Dead Sea Scrolls and other things, and he's coming out with a commentary on Genesis. And I sent some material to him, and he was so impressed with it. He said, "I want to include this in my commentary and give you credit." All right, fine. So I told him where I got it from. I actually got it from a meeting that I attended around, I suppose it might have been December of 1965 at the headquarters of Chabad at 770 Eastern Parkway in Brooklyn, if you've ever heard of Chabad. But anyway, let me just say something. When the Bible begins in Genesis, first of all, let me say that using Robert Alter's translation, we don't have to worry about the age of the earth. Let's say that God created, fashioned a world for Adam and Eve and their descendants. And that's the focus of chapter 1 according to Alter's translation. So if there was a pre-Adamic world, then okay, that's not to me a conflict.
Hmm.
So let's focus on that. So we have a chaotic situation, and God is setting it in order. And in the first verse of the Bible, the last three words, um, we have the word. Well, let me just look. If you don't mind, I'm going to look at it in.
No worries.
I'm going to look at it in the Hebrew
No worries.
because I'm thinking off the top of my head.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
Okay.
While you're looking that up, there's something that I want to posit for the
Good. All right.
audience.
Very good.
So there's been a commentary on Genesis, and one really interesting thing about it is just how power-packed just the first statement is if you really parse it out. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, because it posits that there is not only a creator, but a creator from absolutely nothing, right? Nothing pre-existed this creator, which is different than a lot of creation myths and whatnot. It's only one creator. It is not a plurality, which a lot of creation myths would have as well. There's nothing given about the origin of the deity itself, which is unique. Usually there's a birth to the deity or something like that, but obviously God is eternal. But this is a profound thing. It's one of those things you take for granted, but there's so many profound statements in just that first one. You also have God in immediate control of nature, not being subject to the rules of nature. And then you also have the idea that nothing about the creation of the earth is sexualized. You don't have any sort of fertility going on. It is completely removed from that. And those are all things that are very different than a typical myth. But back to you.
And remember that the Bible shows that all human beings come from Adam and of course later on Eve's created on the sixth day. If we keep reading,
Right.
but so all human beings go back to Adam and Eve. So that's also very important. That really we're all part of the human race, all of us. Anyway, the way the Genesis 1:1 begins, the last three words of that verse, the third to the last ends with a mem. The next one ends with a tav. I'm sorry, the first three words. Let's go back to the beginning. The beginning. Bereshit bara Elohim. In the beginning, created, and then of course God. God is the subject. But in biblical Hebrew, often the verb precedes the subject. So we have tav, Bereshit, and then bara, aleph, and then Elohim, mem. So those three letters, tav, aleph, and mem, are the letters of the words emet for truth. But
Mm.
they're confused here. They're not in the correct order.
Oh.
It's tav, aleph, mem, because you start out with a chaotic situation. But when you go to the end, Genesis 2:4, Asher bara Elohim la'asod, which God created to make, then you have Elohim aleph. Let's go to it in the second chapter. See if this will get me to the second chapter. Um, well, let me just Asher bara Elohim la'asod. So you have bara,
Yeah.
which with an aleph,
Right.
Elohim with
Mm-hmm.
a
With
mem,
the
and
mem.
lasot ends with a tav.
Right.
So the last three words of Genesis 2:4, the first three of that section have emet in chaos, but the last three words of that section, aleph, mem, tav, have it in order. So God has now, uh, put everything into order. There were scholars having a debate about what was the first occupation. So one person said, well, to make Eve, God in effect became a surgeon. So surgery
Mm.
is the first occupation. But then somebody else, then an engineer said, yes, but God had to make order out of chaos. So the first occupation was engineer. Then the politician said, yeah, but who made the chaos?
Yeah, that's good. I like that. Um, One thing that's been noted that's kind of a nerdy thought, but I figure our listeners might appreciate that, is that you have the beginning where you have God saw the light and it was good, but then you have the separation of night and day, and there's no statement about that. That's kind of the first day. And then you have the second day, and there is nothing about it. But then the third day, he goes back and he says it's good. So it's kind of
Twice.
interesting, right?
Twice.
Yeah, so it's interesting that there's that skip. There's that skip of it's not and then it is, which I suppose those who are looking for maybe Trinitarian things could say third day being good. Maybe I don't know. I'm sure there's lots of different speculation. It's just something fun to look at because I'm sure there's a reason in the verbiage. I've not heard a particularly solid argument about it, something to look at. Um, but another thing I will say about the creation account, and I want to hear your thoughts about, are just some of the things kind of caked in that I think people don't necessarily think about. Like when you talk about the stars, it's Robert Alter has the for the fixed time. Sometimes it's for seasons, but this idea that you have a calendar system, you have a reason to have anniversaries or commemorations is pre-sin. It's not necessarily connected to sin. So, what do you think about that?
Yeah, that's a profound thought.
Well, thank you.
No, I agree with that. And I think I hadn't thought of that before. But the term is Moadim, which is translated as appointed times. And in Leviticus 23, speaking about the annual festivals and the weekly Sabbath and the special days of sacrifice, the Omer, and before that, the Passover sacrifice, God calls them Moadim, my Moadim.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'd like to say something about the importance of monotheism, as Daniel said. Uh, in the Bible, God has various titles, and Elohim is a very honorific title. The plural ending, it kind of gives it a majestic ring, but but God is one, and so He says He created, He made. It's all singular, a
Mm-hmm.
third person singular. If you check foreign translations like Spanish or French, you'd see that more clearly because
Mm-hmm.
in English it's less clear because of what has happened in English. You go back to older English and it would be more clear.
Mm-hmm.
However, there is one plural verb, and that's 126. There, God, and He said, which is singular, and God said, "Let us make man." That is plural. So, who's He talking to?
Mm-hmm.
Well, if we keep reading, we'll see that there are spirit beings, that there's a heavenly realm, and we see there are cherubim in the third chapter. We also can read Job 38 that there were angels who were around when God created the world. Angels were witnessing it. So we see God addressing, in effect, as it were, the heavenly council as that statement is made. But in the next verse, He created the human beings.
Mm-hmm.
So, but this is at least my comment on that. I mean, it's
Yeah.
not my unique comment, but I'm passing on.
No, that's good. It's another thing that's caked in. Another thing that you could argue is potentially caked in here, or I guess baked in is really how people say it more often, um, is that when you have the different animal classifications, you can make something of that because you have wild beasts and you have crawling, and then you have what's called cattle or livestock, which might indicate animals that are suitable for consumption later, but or certainly domesticated. But again, this is all classifications that are being brought up from the beginning. This is not something that gets brought up later. I think sometimes people think, pre-sin, it was like this paradise where all the animals were maybe docile and all the same. And it seems like if you have classifications like that, that there still were some animals that were maybe more intended for beasts of burden or helpful. I don't know. There's something to be made for the classifications. At least I think so. What do you think?
Yeah, that's worthy of further study, further research. I also want to mention that when we finish the passage, we already have reference to the Sabbath.
Mm-hmm.
So the Bible begins by, in effect, conditioning us to rest on the seventh day. It's from the very beginning of the
Mm-hmm.
God's word.
Right.
The Sabbath is there.
And pre-sin, of course. And and just to bring it all full circle to how you started this with the idea that you don't necessarily have to accept a young Earth in order to read this literally. Um, it is always funny to me that the people that can be so adamant about, oh well, if you try to accept the gap theory or another stuff, you're just being so anti the point of the account and things like that. When it's funny because it seems like the account is deliberately trying to lead us to this seventh day structure, so it's a bit getting lost in the weeds. It's very unfortunate to me that you can be so adamant, and I'm all for being adamant about the literalness of the Bible, but it's sad when you're so literal that you then discount that concept. It's such a beautiful concept. So we're definitely not that way. We're pronomian around here, as they say, or Sabbath keepers, commandment keepers, however it is. And do you have any other comments on Genesis 1 before we wrap things up for this episode? We covered
I
it pretty well.
appreciate what you said.
Well, thank you. And we thank you, and we certainly hope that you enjoy this conversation. We will be back, of course, in chapter 2. We kind of left you with a cliffhanger with the third verse. So we'll be back with verse number 4 and continuing on in the next one. So we'll see you there.